Hi everybody, welcome back to another edition of the GoGamecocks.com College Football Preview Show. Today we're going to look at 5 key questions facing the 2014 Gamecocks. Number 1, can this team win 11 games again? They've done it 3 years in a row. And as Steve Spurrier has pointed out, and I think it's a good point, it's not like they've won that many games by upsets. I mean, this is a team that's been favored. You look at the schedule this year, they're going to be favored in a lot of games again this year. But there's a difference between can they and will they. You replace some lesser lights in the SEC West with Auburn and Texas A&M, and a Texas A&M game that really, for me, looks like a really tricky game for the Gamecocks. You've got games at home. Steve Spurrier's mentioned that, where South Carolina's won 18 in a row. Can they? Absolutely. Will they? I'm not so sure they get it done this year. Nothing wrong with a 10-3 season, a 9-3 type regular season. I don't know. David, you tell me.
Well, that's the question, is can they or will they? I mean, I don't think anybody expected them to do what they've done the past 3 years. I definitely think they can, because the schedule is much more conducive than it has been, when they won 11 games.
Right.
Will they is the question. I think that they'll win at least 10. Whether that will be the end-all, be-all of the season, we'll have to see. But I think that they will get double-digit wins no matter what. I just don't know if it'll be the magical 11 that's been around for the past 3 years. The reason I say that, despite a more conducive schedule, despite the offense looking very powerful, you still have a guy in Dylan Thompson that you don't know if he's going to be able to just do what Connor Shaw did, which was win the football game. Right. Find a way to win the football game. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing. We all know Dylan Thompson has won a couple of big football games, from that Outback Bowl, that Clemson game 2 years ago. Steve Spurrier pointed out he's the only guy that beat UCF last year.
Right.
Well, he's going to have to do that on a consistent basis. And also, with so many questions on defense and facing a lot of powerful offenses early in the season, USC could get tripped up. I think the biggest thing about the last 3 years, Josh, they've had 14 games that were decided by a touchdown or less. They went 11-3 in those games.
Yeah.
Are those big plays going to keep happening? Because we all know it's cyclical, and all of a sudden it might just draw up. Are you going to get that Jadeveon Clowney strip sack of Tyler Bray against Tennessee? Are you going to get that last-second pick from Jimmy Legree to save the Vanderbilt game last year? Are you going to do what you did against Missouri, in that incredible fourth-quarter comeback? So I do think South Carolina will get double-digit wins, at least 10. I just can't quite commit to saying they'll definitely win 11, not just yet.
That leads into the second question. 11-win seasons have been the standard, but it's been a little while since South Carolina's won the SEC East. Mm-hmm. Can they do it again? You go first this time, and then I'll...
I really think that they will win the SEC East. I mean, despite maybe having like a 9-3 season or what have you, I think that they're going to win the East and get to Atlanta. The reason why is that the East, outside of South Carolina and Georgia, is really full of kind of struggling teams. Mm-hmm. You don't know what Missouri's going to do a year after they won 12, because they lost a lot of talent that won those 12 games. Tennessee's probably still a year away, and they're going to get beat up pretty bad by their schedule. Vanderbilt and Kentucky, who knows what Derek Mason's going to do in Nashville, but he lost a lot of talent off that team, and he's installing a new scheme. Kentucky, despite having all these players come in, all these high-ranking recruits, they still got to go out there and play as freshmen, and we all know how difficult that can be.
And they're still Kentucky.
Right, yeah. So, Georgia, a lot of people aren't talking about them as much because they went 8-5 last year. The reason they went 8-5 is because everybody on the offense got hurt. Right. Now, if they can just make everybody healthy and stay healthy, they have got just a stack of wide receivers that can go out and catch the ball and ease the transition for Hudson Mason taking over for Aaron Murray. And those two running backs that they got, really all four of the running backs are just absolute monsters out there on the field. So I think that the East is very wide, or it's going to come down between South Carolina and Georgia. Georgia's second game, South Carolina's third game of the year is Georgia in Columbia. South Carolina's not going to lose that game, and that's why they're going to take that. And even though they might stub their toe once or twice later on, it will be enough for South Carolina to win the SEC East and go to Atlanta on December the 6th.
I agree with you with almost everything you said. I think that South Carolina wins the East. I think that South Carolina and Georgia, who to me look so similar in so many ways, are the cream of the crop. I don't believe, like some people do, that this is the great Florida Gators resurrection year. I don't see that happening, although there are people who do. So you look at South Carolina and Georgia and you point to that game. And for me, what I keep coming back to is the last 3 seasons, South Carolina has beaten the Eastern Division champion, but not made it to Atlanta. So in 2 of those times, it was Georgia in that game. You want to go out and win that Georgia game. But no matter what happens in that Georgia game, the season's not over for either team. If South Carolina wins that game, they've got to finish it up like you talk about. If South Carolina loses that game, they've got to understand that formula's worked for Georgia. They can still win it in an East that's going to be a little bit topsy-turvy. I think they win it, but, it's going to take week by week by week. I don't think you can just circle the Georgia game and say the winner goes, because it just hasn't worked that way the last 3 years. Question number 3. How important is that 3-4 defense going to be to this season? I think very. I think that defensive versatility is great if you can do it without losing the fluency you have in your main sets. So can you go back and forth between the 3-4 and the 4-2-5 and do it smoothly? If you can, that's going to be great, because they want a bunch of linebackers on the field. They're a little worried about their depth in the defensive line. They've got guys like Texas A&M on the schedule who run a spread offense. There's more and more speed in the SEC, so you want to get faster guys out there. So I think the 3-4 could be huge, but I think you've got to be able to do it well, and you've got to be able, if you're going to go back and forth, you've got to make sure your guys can do that. The worst thing you can do is try to do too much and they don't do anything well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Josh. And, when you say how important will the 3-4 be, well, considering how much Whammy Ward's been implementing it, it has no choice but to be important.
Yeah.
They're not just going to go into one game, and if it doesn't work so well, they're going to abandon it and just say, that's it, we're going to go back to our standard 4-2-5, and I don't think they're going to do that. And it's like you said, it all comes down to the communication with the linebackers, because now they have to watch out for the D-line in front and the secondary and back. Those guys, as sophomores, are going to have to call out the defensive signals, make sure everybody's where they're supposed to be, make sure if they're going to creep up with the spur and the BOB linebacker on that side, to make sure those guys are in the right position, or to make sure they're going to be dropping back in coverage once the ball is snapped. Right now, there's been no problems with the communication, but it's been, there hasn't been a real game to play yet. They're going to have to go out there and see what they can do. So, yes, it's going to be very important, because it seems Whammy Ward is not going to back off on implementing this package and, depending on it throughout the season. So you look at the 3-4. We've already kind of talked about this another time, but the key game of this schedule, other than the Georgia Bulldogs in Week 3, I'm thinking that, it's going to come down to another one of those East opponents. I'll let you go first. What's the key game besides Georgia?
For me, it's Texas A&M right out of the gate. I may be building the Aggies up more than I should. I know Johnny Football is gone. I know that defense is really terrible. But Kevin Sumlin's a pretty good football coach. The 2 quarterbacks that they've got, whoever they go with, it's going to be a highly regarded guy who's got the talent, and they've got a bunch of guys who can catch passes against. What we've talked about before are cornerbacks and some defensive backs who don't have much experience for South Carolina. Speedy Noyle is a freshman. Everybody says he's the real deal. I think nationally he could be the guy that people come out of Williams-Brice Stadium talking about. Man, did you see that kid? So South Carolina's got to make sure that those guys don't hurt them too badly, win a shootout. If you don't, I just worry that it hurts this entire team's confidence, and that's so key as you look to replace so many important players.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Josh, I definitely agree with you that A&M's going to be a tricky game. I think that they ultimately win. Why? Because it's at home, and they've just shown a very good habit of winning these kinds of games at home. But the other important game to me outside of Georgia is the Florida game at the end of the season, last SEC game. Very likely it's going to come down to a situation like 2 years ago where they go down in the swamp looking to clinch the SEC East. Yeah. We all remember what happened 2 years ago.
Did not go well.
South Carolina defense completely shut down Florida's offense, but turnovers on special teams gifted Florida 3 touchdowns, and they never got out of that rut. Ended up losing by 33 points in a game where they gave up less than 200 yards. So that game to me is going to stand out because it's probably going to represent the SEC East clincher. Steve Spurrier remembers full well how he was embarrassed in a stadium that he used to own. He's still thinking about it, and I think that Lorenzo Ward is going to go down there and say, hey, I shut these guys down 2 years ago, and I can do it again if I get some help from the offense. Right. Now, is Florida going to be better than last year? Well, you think they almost have to be after going 4-8 and just stinking it up the last half of the season. But I just don't know how good that offense is going to be. Yes, Jeff Driscoll is back. Yes, they've got some quality players. They have one of the country's best defenders in Vernon Hargraves III at corner. But they've got to make sure that, A, everybody stays healthy, and B, that they just get the ball ball downfield and start scoring some points. It wasn't just the injuries last year, Josh. It's that nobody really knew what they were doing on offense. I think that the highlight clip is when two players blocked each other on a jet sweep to the right. So that Florida game, to me, is the most important game on the schedule other than Georgia.
That leads into our final question. Can South Carolina beat Clemson for a 6th year in a row? I'll start here. I say no. It's just math. It's got nothing to do with how I see these teams matching up, because we're so far away from that game. I just don't think we know how they're going to match up. It's just math. South Carolina's on a 5-game winning streak. I think the Gamecocks may just have to be happy with that. In the history of this series, which goes back more than 100 years, only once has any team won more than the 5 in a row that South Carolina's currently won. That's in like 34 and 40. Clemson's lost twice in a row in Death Valley alone to South Carolina. I think that South Carolina may very well be a better football team, but rivalry games, it's so difficult to do what South Carolina's already done. I just don't see them doing it again.
Well, Josh, first of all, I'm stunned that they managed to win 5 in a row.
It's amazing.
I'll be the first to tell you, during last year's game, USC jumped on top. Clemson came back to tie it at 17 in the 4th, and I'm sitting up there and I'm thinking this is going to be the year where Clemson gets them, just because they have more talent. Well, all of a sudden, Clemson can't hold on to the football. Right. USC gets 2 touchdowns and wins going away. Can they get those breaks a 6th time? I say yes. I think it's going to be in Death Valley again, and I think that they do make this 6. For one, it's a game they expect to win now. It's a game that, a lot of these guys grew up in state, and they've never known anything but beating Clemson, and they know that if the game gets tight, Clemson's going to make some kind of mistake to hurt them, and South Carolina's going to be there to grab that ball and make it happen. Who knows who will be playing what, if it'll be Dylan Thompson's repeat performance from 2 years ago or what. But I think South Carolina will go up there, and despite Clemson's increased focus on this game, who knows if they'll be playing for the ACC championship the next week or not, or if USC will be going to Atlanta. I think South Carolina goes up there and does bring home number 6. The highest win streak in the series is 7, as you mentioned, that Clemson had in the 30s, and I think USC will definitely go into 2015 looking to tie that record. Number 6 will happen.
That's it for today, folks. Join us tomorrow when we give you 5 predictions for the 2014 season.